Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic, What If Kaguya Was Naruto's Girlfriend? If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's start. Chapter 1, The Touch of a Goddess. Something no mortal man should ever trifle with or cross. A simple touch and/or glance would send you spiraling into an abyss of insanity. The touch of a goddess. Blessings are spared for those who cross paths with a woman who could rip the world asunder without a care in the world. The touch of a goddess. You are told stories as a child about beings like Kaguya Ōtsutsuki. Individuals that can create stars, create moons, control time and space, but you often wrote them off as fairy tales due to the sheer incredulity of it all. You cannot understand something if you have not experienced it. You cannot believe something if you have not witnessed it. The touch of a goddess. Sasuke. This isn't good. Silence. Horrible, awful silence. Azure eyes focused intently on the being that was floating not but several feet from off the ground. A beautiful creature that only the primordials of old could have possibly created. A woman. No. No. She was no woman. Sasuke. Sasuke. Hey, answer me. The individual tried again. Naruto. Shut up. The now named Naruto grit his teeth in silence at the reserved tone of his best friend. He did not wish to relinquish his gaze on the goddess that stood before him, but he was aware of the inner turmoil that was circulating in Sasuke. He wasn't confident either. Naruto had to physically stop his hands from shaking as the pale-skinned woman finally moved. Her white tresses swung gracefully as her head snapped towards their position. And she stared, and stared, and stared, and stared, before finally, Tenji, the pale-skinned goddess questioned quietly with a hint of sorrow. Naruto belatedly realized that the woman was staring directly at him instead of Sasuke. His spine tingled and his fingers nervously clenched at the presence of this woman bearing her will upon him. Naruto swallowed nervously as the woman's eyes narrowed in sadness while a sorrowful expression morphed upon her face. Her tiny eyebrows knit together as her eyes glistened. Who was Tenji? Even now, you stand defiant. That sorrow-filled expression slowly tapered off as a morose one took its place. I did what I believed was right. Yet still, you judge me so. Naruto swallowed nervously once more as he glanced towards Sasuke, who was anxiously gripping his kusanagi. Before Naruto could speak, he was interrupted by another. Mother, that is not Taenge. The creature was silenced from continuing as the pale-skinned goddess flared her chakra. The world felt the woman's power as it spread across the globe, swallowing it whole and drowning it in a pit of despair. Naruto felt his heart clench painfully and had to resist the urge to drop to his knees. What is this? Madara Uchiha hadn't even been this powerful. This woman was on a whole other level. Silence, she whispered venomously as her eyes shifted towards the blob of black chakra. The veins around her eyes became pronounced as she stared at Zetsu. He is Tenji, holding the power of my sons. She continued after a moment of silence. I would never forget those eyes. She finished somberly. Naruto swallowed his anxiety before exhaling softly. He began to slowly control his breathing as he pushed all of the negative emotions pouring out of the goddess away. Once calmed, he placed his hand atop Sasuke's shoulder and began to channel his chakra through his friend, calming him down as well. The blonde teen nodded to his friend, who returned the gesture with his own nod. He slowly shifted his attention back to the floating goddess before tugging on his ruined mesh shirt. The material was barely clinging atop his torso and was riddled with holes and tears. His orange pants were torn and shredded with several tears across the thighs and was only covering the bottom of his knees. Glancing towards Sasuke, he nodded his head before flaring his own chakra. A golden shroud of chakra ignited around his body, surrounding him in an ethereal glow that rivaled the sun. A peaceful aura settled in the area as Naruto's chakra countered the onslaught of depressing and negative emotions pouring out from Kaguya. His presence, so bright and loving, was a stark contrast to the presence that Kaguya exuded. 7 pitch black orbs slowly materialized behind Naruto's back before swirling in a hypnotic pattern. One of the orbs slowly left its synced formation before floating atop Naruto's hand. The Gudodama began to morph and change its shape entirely, changing into a thin staff and spinning rapidly. Naruto glanced at the object before grasping the weapon and twirling it in his hand. He exhaled once last time before staring directly into the goddess' eyes. I don't know who Tenji is, but he sounds like someone important to you. The woman did not respond to the statement, choosing to stare at who she believed was her lover reincarnated. Naruto glanced at his best friend, giving him a look and nodding quietly. An unspoken conversation happened and Sasuke loosened his grip on his kusanagi. The golden shrouded teen rested his staff against his shoulder before speaking again. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Super Gramps spoke about you. He said you were an emotionless monster. Naruto detected the shift of emotions instantly. Her somber expression remained, but Naruto could sense the anger lurking beneath. The woman began to slowly descend, but not once did her eyes stray away from Naruto. But that's not true, is it? He questioned rhetorically with hardened eyes. She did not answer. I sense far too many emotions coming from you. Sadness, anger, regret. His eyebrows furrowed as he continued speaking. Unlike Madara, you actually understand what you're doing. Kaguya was silent for what felt like hours before her head tilted. You even speak like him. There was a horrible silence that followed her statement, and the next action surprised even Naruto himself. I will not make the same mistake twice. Naruto's unique eyes widened to an impossible degree as the pale-skinned woman appeared in front of him. What? When did she move? He would never get his answer. Naruto idly heard Sasuke's scream before a cone of black surrounded his vision, cutting off all light and depriving him of all his senses. I will correct the mistake that you made. After I cleanse this world we will be together again, Tenji. I promise you. Naruto heard Kaguya's voice but was unable to pinpoint it. Everywhere he looked was black. Black. Hate, sadness, loneliness, anger, rage, depression. Every emotion that he had conquered during his rigorous training to become a sage slammed into him with a force that resembled one of Tsunade's overpowered punches. These weren't his emotions. Naruto closed his eyes maybe, and began to focus on the turmoil that was swirling around inside Kaguya. Normally, he'd be freaking out and screaming about how unfair life was, but now wasn't the time. He could still think, and while he wasn't entirely sure about what was happening, he assumed that he was in Kaguya's subconscious, or at least some part of it. He knew he was cut off from the outside world in some fashion, but he was still able to think. And that's all he needed. Okay. Think. Shit. Was he even thinking? Idiot. He began to channel his chakra as his breathing became slower. His hands slowly clasped together and he tilted his head down. He needed to be calm here. Sasuke was relying on him. So was the rest of the world. There goes the anxiety. Breathe. In. Out. I'll be surprised if you can escape this shithole. Naruto ignored the voice of his partner and tried to sense his surroundings. He was awarded with absolutely nothing, and it was only slightly annoying. Okay. So that wasn't going to work. Breathe. In. Out. His blonde locks jostled as he tilted his head. Breathe. In. Out. Her emotions. Naruto flared his chakra, at least believing to do so, and latched onto Kaguya's emotions. He sifted through the waves of negative emotions with little trouble and came upon something unique. He couldn't describe what he was sensing due to the lack of actual senses, but if he could, then he'd compare it to a ribbon. A ribbon that was attached to another ribbon and vice versa. Breathe. In. Out. Naruto exhaled quietly before tugging on the ribbon. Nothing. Well. That didn't he. A brilliant flash of white light exploded in front of his face. His eyes instinctively shut due to the action. There was silence for several moments before he heard a familiar voice, though this time it was not layered in sadness but in anger. Ashiki. Naruto slowly opened his eyes at the woman's exclamation before tilting his head with a perplexed expression. He blinked in confusion several times at the scene playing out in front of him. Was this a memory? A vastly different-looking Kaguya was glaring hatefully at another pale-skinned man. The man's face was shrouded in darkness, but Naruto could make out a single horn that wrapped around the man's head starting from the right ear and curling behind his head. He wore an incredibly high-collared kimono that was open at the chest, revealing his pale skin and toned physique. His kimono was white and lacked any kind of design on the front. Princess Kaguya. So frail and pathetic. Ashiki mocked cruelly. Still running from Momoshiki, are you? Ha 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 ha. Kaguya's glare became vicious, but she did not challenge the man. How did you find me? The pale-skinned man slowly circled Kaguya. An action that caused the woman to tremble in fear. How? Easy. You're shit at covering tracks. He snorted loudly before placing his fingers atop the woman's shoulder. Momoshiki requested I deliver you to him. Ashiki ignored the woman's terrified expression as his hand squeezed her shoulder painfully. But his eyes met hers and a sick smile formed on his face. I enjoy watching you suffer like the vermin you are. So, go. Run. Run like your life depends on it. He relinquished his hold on the woman's shoulder before roughly shoving the woman away. Run, little Kaguya, run. The woman spared no time and immediately ran as fast as she could. Her form was a blur to even Naruto, and he had to strain his eyes to keep the woman in his sights. Several seconds passed by in silence before the pale-skinned man laughed loudly. Oh, Momoshiki, you really botched this one up, didn't you? Urashiki won't be pleased. After his statement, the man seemed to just disintegrate into nothing. His form becoming nothing more than dust and soot as his presence vanished. Ashiki, Momoshiki, Urashiki. There were more of these beings. Beings that scared Kaguya. Naruto clenched his eyes shut and gripped his hair tightly as he tried to stop the mental breakdown that was about to unfold. If they dealt with Kaguya, and that's a big if, then they would have to deal with 3 other people just like Kaguya. What the hell? Is this some sort of sick joke? Naruto yelped in surprise as another brilliant flash of white exploded in front of him. His arms crossed in front of his face, shielding him from the bright assault on his vision. Once the light faded, he slowly lowered his arms and tilted his head with a curious expression. Do you really have to leave, Tenji-kun? Naruto's eyes widened as he stared at the fair-skinned man named Tenji. He sported black hair and wore his hair in a unique fashion. He had a straw-like headband that wrapped around his forehead and wore a string necklace that sported a Magatama medallion. Tenji smiled softly as he turned towards his lover before speaking. I have to, my love. These peace discussions are necessary. Kaguya sighed quietly as her gaze searched the floor. The land of that are barbarians. They cannot see reason and only think with violence. Gentle hands settled atop Kaguya's own as the man kneeled in front of his lover. We will never know if we never try, Kaguya-chan. Isn't peace what you want? Her white orb stared into his for several seconds before she averted her gaze shyly. She nodded her head before speaking softly. Of course. But at the risk of your life. What if you get killed? Tenji rubbed his lover's hands softly before smiling once more, so bright and loving. Then that is the risk I take for what I believe in. I will find peace. Do you know why, my love? A small smile formed on Kaguya's face as her eyes slowly rose and centered on his. Because you never go back on your word. The man nodded with a grin before closing his eyes and slowly leaning towards his lover. His lips gently molded against Kaguya's as she pulled his body against hers. Naruto stared at the scene playing out in front of him with mixed emotions. He was aware of the uncanny similarities that he and the man named Tenji shared. Never going back on their word. Check. Wanting peace. Check. Willing to put their life on the line for their people and their home. Check. Willing to speak with their enemies to achieve peace. Check. He now understood, to some degree, why Kaguya had called him Tenji. But she didn't actually know him. How had she systemically broken him down with a mere glance? How could she have possibly known about the similarities that he shared with her late lover? It didn't make sense. I would never forget those eyes. That, Auntie Tsunade Kami rest her soul used to say that the eyes were the window to the soul. So maybe, she saw his soul. That was, Before he could ponder the idea further, another flash of light erupted in front of him. This time it did not bother Naruto and he weathered the bright light. Once the bright lights died down, a heavy frown formed on Naruto's face. Why did you betray me, Tenji? Kaguya now resembled the form he had first saw her in when taking over Madara's body. Why? Why did you do it? Was peace more important than your love? I loved you. I put you first. Above everything. She screamed hoarsely as tears poured down her face. They attacked me and you punish me. Me. After everything I've done for you. Her tears dripped down her chin and pooled on Tenji's face. His form was unmoving and still and his gaze was completely blank. Kaguya gripped the man's wrist before placing it on her stomach and crying loudly. Why you made me do it, Tenji. See, can you feel them? Your children. You would have killed your pregnant lover. She screamed out into the heavens for several minutes as rain began to slowly descend from the sky. Naruto's eyes narrowed sadly as he stared at Kaguya, feeling every single emotion. It assaulted his core and burrowed deep within his chest. He didn't even notice the tears that were slowly sliding down his cheeks. Why was this affecting him so much? He didn't even know Kaguya existed and only found out a couple hours before fighting Madara. Why was this bothering him? Why was he so invested in her life now? Seeing some of her most intimate and important memories deep within her mind. Was this the reason? Possibly. Naruto began to wipe his eyes and slowly moved closer towards Kaguya. Her forehead rested against the man's chest and she sobbed in a pitiful manner. A manner he wouldn't have suspected from such a powerful individual. It made him realize that she wasn't all that different from humans. That she had emotions and that she felt just as harshly as everyone else. Her suffering was no less severe than others. She felt, and she hurt. But, the way Hagoromo spoke about her depicted her as some evil monster incapable of being reasoned with. Naruto just couldn't see that. The details that Super Gramps had left him with had painted a very vivid picture about the woman Kaguya was supposed to be. An emotionless husk of her former self hell-bent on the destruction of the world by subjugating the populace and reclaiming chakra as her own. But, that's not what he could sense. She was a broken woman. Molded by the harsh and unforgiving reality that unfolded before her. Even now, watching this scene with her late lover was a painful reminder that negative experiences shape who you become as a person. Your ideals could shift at the drop of a hat and you'd be oblivious to the changes. Naruto could relate to Kaguya. He certainly sympathized with her. But he sympathized with everyone. It was just the kind of person he was. He always saw the good in people. That's not to say that he didn't ignore the evil in people, but he didn't want to be a person that judged others off of one action. Everyone was capable of evil in this world. Everyone. Even he was capable of it. Learning that Auntie Tsunade had passed during Nagato's initial attack had almost broken him. His heart still hurt to this day and he doubted it would ever truly go away. He had wanted to truly kill Nagato. To make the man pay for hurting one of the single most important people in his life. And he almost had. He had seized the man by his throat and would have snapped it had it not been for Conan. She had begged and pleaded. Begged. Pleaded. At the time it only made him angrier. Why was this woman pleading for this monster's life? Did she not witness him just kill thousands of innocents? With no remorse. And she was willing to beg and plead for his life. What stayed his hand was the teachings that Jiraiya had bestowed on him. Killing in vengeance would never bring back that which you lost. Auntie Tsunade wouldn't have wanted him to see him like that. She knew him more than others did. The mother he never had. Naruto slowly fell to his knees and placed his hands atop his thighs. He stared at Kaguya's sobbing form for several long minutes before slowly raising his hand and reaching out to her. His hand didn't make contact with her body and just floated through her. A small frown formed on his face as he retracted his hand away from the goddess. I swear to you, Tenji. The woman spoke softly through muffled sobs. I will do everything in my power to make this world a better place. She sniffled quietly before laying a gentle kiss atop the man's lips. When she raised her head, she almost seemed to stare directly at Naruto. As if she was somehow seeing him. Naruto met her gaze and could physically see the changes that were being made. This was the experience that changed who Kaguya was as an individual. Changed her into the monster that Hagoromo believed she was. But Naruto knew better. He didn't agree with her methods because they were inhumane, but he understood her. Understood why she was doing this. Understood the lengths she had taken and would eventually take for her goal. Another flash of white light exploded around his form and Naruto shielded his eyes. He was silent for several moments before slowly removing his arms from around his face. His cerulean orbs traveled around his surroundings in slight awe. Iridescent lights shone brightly in an empty void of space. There were no distinguishable shapes or landmarks, but beautiful colors cascaded all around him. He slowly rose to his feet while taking in this vast amount of empty space. You understand me. Naruto's eyes widened as he swiveled on his heel, coming face to face with Kaguya. The horned goddess was several feet away and was staring at him with half-lidded eyes. Naruto was silent for several moments as he realized that this wasn't a memory. This was real now. He licked his lips quietly before responding. Yes, I do. Kaguya took a single step forward. But you do not agree. Naruto slowly shook his head with a small frown. No, I don't. This isn't the way. Kaguya took another step forward. If you understand, then you know that this is the only way. A hardened expression began to form on his face as he crossed his arms against his chest. No, Kaguya, it isn't. You've given up your humanity. She took another step closer, slowly closing the distance between them. I was never human to begin with. Naruto shook his head, uncaring of that fact. It didn't matter if she was a human or not, she had emotion and was capable of reason. You don't need to be human to know right from wrong. Kaguya, you know this isn't right. Kaguya's head slowly shook, causing her long tresses to sway to and fro. Her eyes closed and a sad smile formed on her face. She took yet another step closer. I know it isn't right. But it's the path that I've already chosen. Naruto frowned heavily as he responded. You can change, Kaguya. You can't make the world a better place like this. You're taking away the freedom that we have. That isn't peace. It's subjugation. Her sad smile strained for a moment as her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her head shook as she took another step towards Naruto, now standing within reaching distance. Tears slowly slid down her face as an aura of indescribable sadness wafted off her. It slammed into Naruto, who weathered the harsh emotions without strain. How else can I save a world plagued by hate and death? The goddess asked rhetorically, not expecting an answer. This time it was Naruto who took a step towards Kaguya. His taller stature slightly towering over the horned goddess. His hand extended towards the woman as a gentle smile formed on his face. Through love and understanding, he answered softly with a smile so bright that it quite literally lit the world ablaze around them, changing the surrounding colors to warm colors of red and orange. Kaguya's eyes roamed around the empty void of space as Naruto's presence began to wash away her negative emotions. His bright and loving aura settling around her and to slowly wash away all of her fears and doubts. A pained expression formed on Kaguya's face as she faltered. She took half a step away from the 17-year-old as she responded. I can't. And no. Mankind is poison. Naruto's expression did not change in the slightest as he took a full step towards Kaguya. He now stood directly in front of her with only a couple of inches separating them. Do you truly believe that, Kaguya? Or is it the pain speaking? Naruto's aura slammed into Kaguya with the weight of 1,000 suns and showed no signs of stopping. Her will faltered for a brief moment as she basked in the calming aura of his chakra. Tears began to slowly slide down her beautiful face as she stared into his cerulean pupils. Her face scrunched up painfully as she whispered in a pitiful tone, trying desperately to avoid his intoxicating aura. And no. Stop. Please. Naruto's eyes crinkled slightly as his smile grew softer. His arms slowly encircled around her form and he ignored her pitiful attempts of escape. Trust me, Kaguya. I know it's scary, but believe me when I say it. I can change this world and I will change it. He squeezed her tightly and noticed that she had stopped resisting his hold. Do ya know why I won't give up? Kaguya did not respond as tears flowed freely down her face. Her eyes clenched shut as she buried her face into the boy's chest, knowing exactly what he was going to say. Because I never go back on my word. After those words, the surrounding world seemed to just crumble apart. The colors began to slowly deteriorate and disintegrate and a ginormous flash of white light exploded around Kaguya and Naruto. Sasuke huffed loudly as sweat cascaded down his body. His mismatched pupils glanced towards Kaguya from the safety of his perfect Susanoo and he breathed in heavily. Come on, Naruto. Hurry up and finish whatever you're doing. He mentally shouted in his mind. He had been battling with Kaguya for the better part of an hour and had not once managed to get a hit on her. Even despite the distractions that Naruto was no doubt causing in her mind, he couldn't hit her. Her power was something to behold. Perhaps with Naruto at his side he would have stood a better chance. Sasuke sighed quietly as a bow formed in the hands of his Susanoo. The titanic construct of chakra pulled on the strings of the ranged weapon as a mass of black fire formed into an arrow. The flames of Amaterasu burned with a thirst that was incapable of being quenched. Sasuke's Rinnegan pulsed as the flames became chaotic. He mentally ordered his Susanoo to draw the bow back even further before taking aim at the goddess. Enten, Susanoo Kagutsuchi. The arrow was released a moment later as a sonic boom exploded out from Sasuke's position, destroying mountains and completely eviscerating the terrain surrounding him. Kaguya made no move to dodge the attack and only stared at the rapidly approaching flaming arrow. Her head tilted before the arrow struck her chest. There was a brief lull of silence before the arrow exploded in a tornado of swirling flames. It spun with such force that the terrain surrounding Kaguya was immediately reduced to ash. Sasuke roared loudly and clenched his fist as the tornado of Amaterasu imploded on itself. A gargantuan amount of smoke and ash exploded outwards, covering the skies and darkening the world even further. The last remaining Uchiha waited with bated breath and his heart stopped for a single moment as Kaguya slowly floated out of the smokescreen with nary singe nor burn. What the fuck? Sasuke's hands clenched so tightly that blood began to seep out from his palms. This just couldn't be real. His first solid attack on the woman did absolutely nothing. She was literally walking it off. Was it truly helpless? Did he truly not stand a chance against her? Sasuke's teeth gnashed together as his Susanoo slowly disappeared. The titanic construct of chakra slowly deteriorated as Sasuke slowly floated towards the charred earth. Sweat pooled at his feet, slowly dripping down his face and splashing into the ground quietly. The goddess did not advance and only continued to blankly stare at his form. What was she doing? He got his answer as a black portal appeared directly behind her. She slowly floated into the portal as she completely disappeared. His eyes widened as her presence completely disappeared. Sasuke extended his senses as far as he could, trying to pinpoint her exact location. It was over before he could even react. A dainty hand gripped his chin as his body completely froze in place. Sasuke's heart skipped a beat as the woman slowly exited from the small tear in space directly in front of him. He hadn't even sensed her. Had Sasuke been in control of his body, then he would have furrowed his eyebrows at the saddened expression on the woman's face. She was crying. Why? He felt her fingers gingerly caress his cheeks and she made no move to strike him down. Why was she doing this? She had him dead to rights. Why wasn't she finishing him off? And why the hell was crying? Please, stop. He heard her plead softly. Was she even talking to him? It didn't feel like it. It was almost as if she was speaking with someone else. Because you never go back on your word. Sasuke felt Kaguya's chakra flare up and not a second later did a bright flash of light explode from her body. He was blasted away the woman and skipped along the ground several times. He rolled a few moments before ripping his kusanagi out of its sheath and stabbing it into the ground. Both of his hands gripped the handle of his blade and he slowly rose to one knee while raising his gaze towards the dust that was kicked up from Kaguya's position. His chest rose and fell slowly as he tried to peer into the smoke and dust with his dujutsu. His eyes widened exponentially as he finally managed to peer into the dust. He spotted Naruto with his arms wrapped around Kaguya, comforting her. The woman's arms were gripping the back of his ruined mesh shirt and her head was resting against his chest. Her body was shaking and trembling ever so slightly while Naruto sported a soft smile. Sasuke continued to watch the two interact and made no move to interfere. Naruto had this handled. Hopefully. Kaguya wasn't attacking, so that was a good indicator, though the woman seemed a little too intimate with Naruto. Sasuke mentally shook his head at the thought. It wasn't his business. If the woman wasn't attacking, then he didn't care what was happening. The ebony-haired teen sighed quietly before relinquishing his hold on his weapon. He dropped to the ground with one of his hands supporting his upper body. A relieved expression formed on his face afterwards as he began to calm his rapidly beating heart. He needed a damn break. Naruto hadn't gotten his ass kicked by this woman and he was only slightly envious of this fact. Damn idiot. Naruto rubbed Kaguya's back for several more moments before speaking quietly. Do you trust me, Kaguya? The horned goddess claws raked through the boy's destroyed shirt before she wordlessly nodded. How could she not? She had connected with him and had showed him the most intimate moments in her life. The experiences that had made her who she was. He understood her. He knew that she wasn't the monster that her beloved sons had believed she was. He sympathized, empathized, and didn't judge her for doing what she believed was the right choice. He shared the same goal that she did. He wanted to make the world a better place. And that's all that Kaguya had ever wanted. And it was precisely this reason that Kaguya couldn't stay here. I trust that you can make the world a better place. Her voice was soft as she clutched the boy's mesh shirt. Please, make my dream a reality. Naruto slowly pulled away from Kaguya as he detected the shift in emotions dwelling inside her. A small frown tugged at his face as he spoke. You make it sound like you're not going to be here to see it. The horned goddess pulled away from the warmth that the boy provided with a melancholy expression. Her white orbs trailed towards Sasuke for a moment before returning back to Naruto. Because I won't. You will be the one to finish what I started. The 17-year-old furrowed his eyebrows as he shook his head. Why can't you stay? Why would you want to leave? This is your dream. Something you've always wanted. You can help me. He supplied in a more upbeat tone towards the end. Kaguya shook her head with a sad smile. This boy. He was too bright. Too kind for his own good. He was ignoring all of the horrendous actions that she was responsible for. But that's who he was as a person. He had forgiven the man who had killed his mentor and mother figure. Forgiven the man who was responsible for his parents' death. Forgiven all of the people who had spit on him when he was but a mere babe. Even forgiving the boy who had nearly killed him on multiple occasions and who he now called brother. She had seen his entire life just as he had seen hers. Watching him grow from that depressed and lonely boy to the kind and caring man that now stood before her. She knew Naruto inside and out. Which made this all the more painful to do. I would want nothing more than to witness our dream become reality. But I do not deserve it. I must atone for all the sins I committed. She shook her head before turning away from Naruto and staring at the countless cocoons that harbored all of mankind. I do not deserve happiness after all I've done. Naruto frowned at the woman's tone before countering. Everyone deserves to be happy and everyone deserves a second chance. Kaguya just shook her head before slowly walking away from Naruto, ignoring his beautiful eyes. Perhaps they do. But not I. I was aware of the atrocities of my actions and I will atone for them. She stated out into the vast valley of cocoons with a saddened expression. Please, seal me once more and undo the damage that I've created. Naruto took a step forward and was about to speak before feeling a hand on his shoulder. He turned his head towards the source and spotted his best friend who was staring at him with a small frown. The two teens continued to stare at one another for several long seconds before Naruto sighed quietly. A hint of sadness appeared in his eyes before he slowly returned his gaze to Kaguya. Are you sure? I can help you, he offered quietly. Kaguya's chest clenched tightly before she shook her head. You must seal me away. Naruto was silent for a moment before speaking once more, his tone being layered in sadness. If that's what you want. Sure, he finished lamely. Sasuke glanced at his blonde friend quietly before directing his attention to the woman. This was a unique situation. These two were interacting as if they had known each all their life. Sasuke would have questioned how that was possible, but he knew, on some level at least, that Naruto was capable of connecting with people near instantaneously. Kaguya was clearly no different, but it seemed far more intimate. Naruto sighed quietly before glancing towards Sasuke and nudging his head forward. The blonde teen said nothing else and slowly made his way towards Kaguya's position with Sasuke following a step behind. The woman continued to stare at the actions she committed and sported a disappointed expression. She had let her emotions dictate her reasons and justify her beliefs. Why? Because she was hurt. She shook her head with a quiet scoff. How could she have been so blind? She always wanted the world to be a better place. Enslaving humanity, taking their chakra away, and subjugating their will while simultaneously draining them of their life force was clearly not the answer. Why did she let this power go to her head? Why? Throwing a tantrum because of the pain that she experienced from Tenji's supposed betrayal. Was it even a real betrayal? Not really. Being of clear mind now, Tenji had every right to react the way he did. She was a bigger threat to humanity as a whole than the land of that could have ever been. Just look at the outcome. Humanity was being enslaved once again, and the only people able to match her were two teens that held the power of her beloved son. She deserved whatever fate the gods held for her, and she would accept it with open arms. Kaguya felt two hands make contact with her back and did not react, just staring blankly out into the vast terrain of rock. Naruto began quietly. Can I ever speak to you again? Sasuke believed that was an odd question to ask. His unique eyes trailed towards his best friend and he just stared at the teen with a calculating gaze. Kaguya was silent for a moment before replying quietly. You are aware of the others. She paused for a moment before turning her head to stare at Naruto. Only then are you allowed to unseal me. Sasuke's eyes narrowed at the answer and before he could voice his concern he was beaten by Naruto. We'll be ready. He nodded with a determined gaze and raised his other hand towards his chest with his thumb pointing inwards. I promise. Kaguya said nothing for several moments before nodding her head silently. Goodbye, Naruto. The teen swallowed quietly as the woman finally addressed him by his name. His eyes narrowed sadly as they trailed southward. Goodbye, Kaguya. Naruto flared his chakra with Sasuke following shortly after. The symbols on their hands shone brightly as they both spoke. Rikudo, Chibaku Tensai. The earth began to shake and tremble shortly after the teens spoke. Kaguya's body slowly rose into the sky as Naruto watched her ascend with saddened eyes. She became a mere speck in the sky before several thousand pieces of earth rocketed towards her position. The giant boulders of rock continued to crash into her, trapping her in an inescapable prison. For several long minutes the process continued. Rock after rock was jettisoned towards the woman, forming what was no doubt the biggest Chibaku Tensai besides the moon itself. After a full 10 minutes of non-stop trembling did the jutsu finally cease. The earth stopped trembling and the world calmed down as the giant satellite of rock hovered unperturbed in the sky. Naruto stared at the massive sphere of rock with a small frown before sighing quietly and shaking his head. Who would have thought that this would have been the outcome of the war? He had changed a goddess. He should be happy. But he wasn't. And he didn't really know why. He was happy that he had stopped her and practically saved the world, but he was feeling kind of empty. You okay, kid? Naruto blinked at the voice of Kurama, who had been surprisingly silent the entire time. He was embarrassed to admit that he almost forgot about his new friend. Naruto sighed quietly before speaking aloud to his Biju. Yeah, I'm okay. I think. Kurama did not respond and did not bother correcting the boy's obvious lie. Kurama and Naruto were now synced on a level that only Biju and Jinchuriki could possibly share. He wasn't okay. Naruto inhaled deeply before turning towards his best friend who was staring at him with furrowed eyebrows. Naruto blinked at the look before speaking. What? He asked quietly. Sasuke was silent for a few moments before ultimately shaking his head and turning towards the satellite of rock that held Kaguya. Nothing, he answered shortly. Come on, let's release the jutsu. He gestured with his hand before holding up his left hand and waiting for Naruto to form the other half of the hand seal. Naruto nodded his head before walking towards his best friend and placing his right hand against Sasuke's left hand. The two teens formed the rat hand seal before pulsing their chakra. The giant tree that held the cocoons of mankind writhed for a moment before it began to slowly shrivel. The world grew brighter and a massive explosion of chakra exploded and began to spread across the entire world. Slowly but ever so surely did mankind began to leave their genjutsu paradise. The thousands upon thousands of cocoons shriveled up as man, woman, child, etc. broke free of their confines. Naruto stared down the valley of his perch and spotted all of his friends and close ones smiling and cheering. It brought a small smile to his face, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. While certainly happy that he had saved the world and freed all of his friends, he still felt like he was missing something. His cerulean orb slowly rose to the massive construct of rock as he stared at Kaguya's prison. His small smile disappeared as both of his hands found purchase in his pockets. Several of his fellow shinobi jumped up to the perch that he and Sasuke stood on, but he ignored their presence and continued to stare at the woman's prison. Why do I miss you so much? Sasuke interacted with his friends, but never took his eyes off Naruto. His best friend had yet to acknowledge his friends and just continued to stare at the earth that rested in the sky. A small frown formed on Sasuke's face at the lack of interaction that Naruto was doing despite being surrounded by his fellow shinobi and friends. His smile was fake. His greetings were hollow. It wasn't right. The ebony-haired teen slowly glanced towards the Chibaku Tensai before returning to the blonde teen. Perhaps it was just the shock of everything that had happened in such a short amount of time. Naruto would be just fine. At least that's what Sasuke told himself. He wouldn't realize how wrong he was in the future. 3 years later. Hey, Auntie Tsunade. A voice softly spoke out into an empty clearing. The sound of glass bottles clinking together was heard, followed shortly afterwards by the sound of a cork being unscrewed. I got your favorite. Gamabunta decided not to be stingy. Hehe. A much more mature-looking Naruto slowly sat onto the grassy terrain in front of a large grave made of stone. Etched into the rock was a memorial of Tsunade's face. Several flowers, vases, and other tributes rested against her grave as Naruto pulled out 2 glass bottles. He arranged the bottles side by side before pouring Tsunade's favorite sake into the glasses. He sported a gentle expression on his matured face as he quietly did his task. His hair was a couple inches shorter but still retained the spiky features that he was so well known for. His attire changed slightly as he wore a black jacket with the sleeves cuffed at his forearms. He wore a pair of burnt orange pants that were tucked into a pair of black open-toed sandals. Kakashi-sensei says I'll be able to take over the mantle in a couple of years. He rose the glass off the ground before softly clinking it against the other glass. It's pretty surreal, I guess. The 20-year-old man chuckled quietly as he stared at the memorial of his surrogate mother. He was silent for a few moments before averting his gaze from her grave and rubbing his neck anxiously with his free hand. I miss you a lot. You were always there for me. His eyes glistened slightly as he continued after a moment of hesitation. It's hard, Auntie Tsunade. Very hard. I'm a jonin now. His smile shifted into a grin which proved to be a depressing sight due to the tears that were slowly trailing down his cheeks. Naruto cleared his throat as he released a choked sob. I tried the dating scene. Well, it didn't lead anywhere. His cerulean orbs fell to the ground as he swirled his cup of sake. All I think about is her. Naruto did not elaborate nor did he continue, choosing to remain silent. Several minutes passed by as a gentle breeze swept through the clearing. After Naruto collected himself, he sipped on his glass of sake before speaking once more. I never did get to tell you how much I loved you. You were like a mother to me. He trailed off quietly and remained silent for a few minutes. Thank you, Auntie Tsunade. I love you. He finished with a soft smile as he downed the rest of his sake. Naruto placed his glass of sake on the ground as his eyes trailed towards the large satellite of rock that was a few hundred miles away from Konoha. It was ever present, never being touched and or bothered. He had made sure of that. He had clones stationed around the large prison day in and day out to make sure that it wasn't tampered or bothered with. It was a painful reminder. He had thought of Kaguya every night that he fell asleep. There wasn't a day that went by where he didn't think about the woman. He had thought it was a phase at first. After all, he connected with a lot of people. Neji, Gaara, Tsunade, Nagato, Obito, Sasuke. But with Kaguya, it was like an obsession. His heart felt empty. It had gotten so bad that he had sought out Kakashi for help. He had questioned his former sensei about the feeling while withholding the information ascertaining to Kaguya herself. Kakashi had teased him about it first, questioning if what he was feeling was about a woman. When Naruto had confirmed, Kakashi had gotten quiet. A few moments of silence and the man had confirmed what Naruto had been putting off. Sounds like you're in love, Naruto. It didn't really surprise Naruto because deep down he had assumed this to be the case, but he had just chosen to ignore it and push it to the back of his mind. In love with Kaguya Ōtsutsuki. The same woman who had given birth to the Rakudo Sennin and the very same woman that had almost enslaved humanity twice. It was crazy. He knew Kaguya for less than 5 hours and was absolutely in love with her. Naruto shook his head quietly as he rubbed his face. He had seen her entire life play out and all of the associated emotions that followed. He knew everything about her. How was he not supposed to fall for her? Yes, her actions and the sins she committed were atrocious, but she had changed. Was it weird? Probably. In love with a goddess. Kami. What would his mom think? Actually, she'd probably be happy that he finally found someone and would possibly jump for joy that he loved the strongest woman in the elemental nations. Shaking his head of those thoughts, Naruto slowly rose to his feet while placing his hands in his pockets. He slowly leaned his body over before placing a gentle kiss on the stone memorial of Tsunade, right on her forehead. Naruto returned to his full height before sensing someone behind him. He furrowed his eyebrows in confusion before spotting a pale-skinned man. A pale-skinned man that shared a heavy resemblance to the Ōtsutsuki's. His eyes narrowed significantly as he began to idly draw in nature chakra. If this Ōtsutsuki wanted a fight, then Naruto would give him one. "What's your name?" Naruto questioned quietly as his pupils shifted into their trademark toad design. The pale-skinned man was silent for several moments before a small smile appeared on his face. His eyes did not open and Naruto suspected that he lacked actual pupils. "My name is Tonari Ōtsutsuki. I wanted to meet the hero of the Fourth Shinobi War, for myself." "You do not disappoint," he replied in a calm manner. Tonari Ōtsutsuki. That wasn't one of the names that he learned from Kaguya's memories. Naruto directed the entirety of his chakra on the man and would have scoffed if he was Sasuke. This guy wasn't anywhere near his level if he was cringing just from the weight of his base chakra. He'd crush him without having to even access Kurama's power. With that being the case, why was he here? "Any particular reason you're here, Tonari Ōtsutsuki?" Naruto questioned with a raised eyebrow. "You wouldn't be able to touch me, in case you were wondering. I suggest you return to where you came from. My best friend isn't as understanding." Tonari's eyebrows furrowed in confusion at the statement before feeling the cold steel of a blade on his throat. His body tensed up as his head slowly turned to face behind him. "What's an Ōtsutsuki doing here?" the newcomer questioned in a hardened tone. His mismatched orbs gazing directly at Tonari with a blank expression. A violet Rinnegan that had several Tomo in his left orb and a Magnikyo Sharingan in the right. "Beats me, Sasuke." Naruto answered lazily. "He didn't attack me so." He trailed off while gesturing with his hand for the pale-skinned man to speak. Sasuke tilted the blade closer to Tonari's throat before speaking, not allowing Tonari to speak. "It doesn't mean he won't cause trouble. He isn't a match for the both of us." The blonde Jinchuriki shrugged his shoulders before turning away from his best friend and walking away. "Let me know what you find. I'm going to visit her." Naruto waved behind his back before disappearing in a yellow flash, leaving his best friend with the unknown Ōtsutsuki. Naruto appeared in a yellow flash directly atop Kaguya's prison. He glanced around his surroundings before shrugging his shoulders and sitting down on the large formation of rock. And he just sat, and sat, and sat, for hours and hours. When he wasn't doing missions or training to get even stronger, he was here. Sitting atop Kaguya's prison. Waiting. For what? He wasn't entirely sure. Well, that was a lie. He knew exactly why. If the Ōtsutsuki that was chasing Kaguya found this planet, then Naruto wanted to be ready to release her at a moment's notice. These beings were incredibly powerful, and while Sasuke and he were incredibly powerful, they were not Ōtsutsuki. It's not to say that they didn't train and get stronger, but it would always pale in comparison to the natural power that the Ōtsutsuki bloodline harbored. Naruto was far more powerful now than when he was 17, exponentially so. But that didn't mean he should get complacent. That Momoshiki guy scared Kaguya. Granted, that had been before she ate the Shinju fruit, but still. Never hurts to prepare just in case. All three of those Ōtsutsuki could potentially attack at the same time. While it was a harrowing thought, he was confident that with Sasuke and Kaguya at his side that they'd be fine. "How are you, Kaguya?" Naruto asked quietly. He was silent for several minutes before speaking once again. "I visited Auntie Tsunade today. Shared some sake with her." He sighed heavily before laying down on the rock with his hands crossed behind his head. "I still hate the taste. I don't get how people can drink the stuff. Tastes awful." Naruto was silent for another few minutes before closing his eyes with a smile. "My birthday is coming up soon and not really feeling it. The guys wanna take me out drinking, but I don't know. I'm just not an alcohol guy. All of it tastes gross, but meh. They wanna go out and I feel obligated to go since I'm barely in the village nowadays, what with all the training, missions and peace discussions between the nations." Several hours went by as Naruto continued to have a one-sided conversation with Kaguya. The sun began to slowly descend as the moon was on the cusp of rising. Naruto slowly peeked an eye open and noticed Sasuke standing several feet away from him, staring at the setting sun. Sasuke wore a piece of black cloth that wrapped around his forehead, holding his hair in place. One of his bangs drooped down his face, covering his Rinnegan and hiding it. He wore a dirty, sandy poncho over his main attire and wore dark draped pants with blank open-toed sandals. His kusanagi was hidden underneath the poncho and rested in the man's right hand. "So, what did y'all learn?" Naruto asked with a curious eyebrow. Sasuke was silent for a moment before shaking his head in slight annoyance. He has an obsession with Hinata. Sasuke glanced towards Naruto to see if he'd react. As expected, nothing. Platonic at best. "Oh," the blonde replied with feigning interest. His eyes slowly shut before he spoke once more in that same bland tone. "What did ya do to him?" The sound of dripping liquid was the only sound that was heard between the two brothers. Naruto made a low humming noise as he responded in a chastising tone. "Sakura's gonna be mad you're spilling blood again." Sasuke didn't bother responding to the boy's statement. Tonari would have been a problem, and problems like that needed to be dealt with swiftly. "Did he suffer?" Naruto asked curiously while peeking an eye open curiously. The last Uchiha glanced at his best friend before responding in a placid tone. "That would require me caring enough to do so. Could have just said, 'No, ya bastard.'" Naruto jibbed back amusingly. Sasuke sported a small smirk on his face as he responded, changing the subject. "Still here, The blonde Jinchuriki sighed quietly before replying. "Just ask what you wanna ask. You love her, don't you?" There was silence for several minutes. "Yes, I do," Naruto responded quietly. "Why are you asking?" The last Uchiha was quiet for a scant few moments before just nodding his head and disappearing, not uttering a single word. Naruto's face scrunched up in annoyance before he proceeded to roll his eyes. "Stupid bastard." 12 years later. Sarada Uchiha vs Shikadai Nara. A much older-looking Naruto slowly opened his eyes before trailing them towards the large arena below him. He was resting his cheek on his clenched fist, not really paying attention to the happenings of the Chunin exams. As bad as that sounded, he took his job as the 7th Hokage serious, but sometimes ya just get lazy. "Nay, Hokage dono." The voice of the 4th Tsuchikage Kuretsuchi rang out in amusement. "Bored already, Naruto slowly glanced to his 4 fellow Kages who were staring at him with raised eyebrows. Ignoring each of their amused gazes, he replied with a small smirk. "Little bit, yeah. Can you blame me though?" Naruto rubbed his eyes before shaking his head and focusing on the fight that was currently happening. The other Kage idly chatted with another, praising the 2 Konoha genins for their intellect and ingenuity. Naruto stared at Sarada with an appraising gaze as he watched her footwork. She moved just like Sasuke did at their age, but fought the ferocity and passion of her mother. She was certainly Sasuke and Sakura's daughter. Shikadai was more or less Shikamaru with a hint of Temari. He was far more motivated, so that was a good sign. Unlike Shikamaru, Shikadai was willing to go out and actively train without the ever-looming threat of Temari's battle fan. Naruto continued to watch the 2 genins fight before feeling a prick at the back of his neck. His eyebrows furrowed for a moment as his gaze shifted towards Sasuke, who was sitting on top of one of the roofs in the stadium. The 2 men stared into each other's eyes for a single moment before flaring their chakra. Not a moment later did the stadium become covered in Sasuke and Naruto's chakra. Every person in the village stopped what they were doing as the 2 strongest men, the elemental nations, exerted their will upon the world. Dark purple chakra exploded in the sky, meshing together with the bright orange chakra that covered the entire village. The entire world seemed to quake underneath the pressure of Sasuke and Naruto's chakra presence as another powerful presence appeared, clashing with Naruto and Sasuke's chakra. "Well, look what we have here." Naruto's unique pupils slowly traveled into the sky, spotting a particularly short, pale-skinned man. He sported 2 antelope-like horns atop his crown and his power was relatively impressive. Naruto appeared beside Sarada and Shikadai with his hands resting atop their shoulders. Sasuke appeared a moment later beside his brother as he too stared up at the diminutive Ōtsutsuki. "Kyuubi Jinchuriki." The short man spoke aloud with a sick smile. "I will be taking that chakra inside you." Naruto stared at the man for a brief moment before another Ōtsutsuki appeared beside the shorter one. This man was giant in comparison to his ally and held a decent amount of power. Not enough to really challenge he or Sasuke. The only person that could be a threat was the short Ōtsutsuki member. "You are that strong, all things considered," Naruto taunted calmly. He immediately noticed the shorter man's irritated visage. You don't even compare to Kaguya. The change in the man's demeanor was noticed by all. His visage shifted from irritated to angry almost instantaneously. His chakra exploded outwards and an amused expression formed on Naruto's face. This man wasn't all that powerful. Naruto could take him by himself. Naruto became shrouded in the energy of Kurama. His Haori jacket extended to the back of his knees and flickered at the tip like ethereal flames. Naruto flared his chakra once more and his orange chakra cloak shined brightly. 7 Gudodama appeared behind his back with 2 small horns jutting out from his crown. Black Magatama markings spread out across his body in a unique fashion. I'd say you're Momoshiki judging by the reaction to Kaguya's name. I've got a score to settle with you, midget. Naruto's taunt caused Momoshiki to grit his teeth in pure rage. You dare mock me, you little monkey. I'll show yo. The diminutive man was cut off from speaking as Naruto appeared directly in front of the man with his hand wrapped around the man's face. A nanosecond passed by before Naruto and Momoshiki disappeared in a yellow flash. Naruto trusted that Sasuke could easily deal with the fat Ōtsutsuki. He wanted to crush Momoshiki beneath his boot. The 2 powerful men appeared in the air several hundred miles away from Konoha. Naruto reared his arm back before launching Momoshiki into the earth. The short man impacted the ground almost instantaneously as a mountain of earth exploded from the action. Naruto remained floating in the air with his hands in his pockets. He was staring down at the ruined earth with a blank expression before turning his head slightly to the right. Behind him was the massive prison of Kaguya, looming ominously. A small smirk formed on Naruto's face as he spoke to the satellite of Earth. Can you sense him, Kaguya-chan? He felt the lightest pulse of chakra from within the sphere and a genuine smile formed on his face. Do you want to be released? He asked rhetorically, already knowing the answer. Another pulse, this time far stronger than the previous. So much so that the prison almost seemed to quake and tremble. A Gudodama morphed into a staff before floating towards Naruto's hand. The blond man twirled the black staff before resting it against his shoulder. I'll release you shortly, Kaguya-chan. I want to break him. His eyes bled red for a moment before returning to their previous bright orange. A beam of pure red chakra zipped out of the dust below Naruto, heading straight towards his head. Naruto glanced towards the beam before raising his hand and casually slapping the beam of energy away from his body and away from Kaguya's prison. The beam of energy struck the ground almost a second later and a ginormous explosion rocked the earth. The land quaked and shifted for several seconds due to the powerful attack. Naruto lazily scratched his chin before pointing his staff towards Momoshiki's position. You're not very strong. I hope you get more powerful, otherwise this'll just be a waste of my time. The shorter Ōtsutsuki member appeared directly in Naruto's with a red orb of chakra that rivaled one of Naruto's Udama Rasengan. I'll crush you. The short Ōtsutsuki screamed out harshly. Naruto scoffed quietly before disappearing in a yellow flash, causing Momoshiki's eyes to actually widen. Pain crashed into Momoshiki as Naruto's golden-clad boot struck against his jaw. Blood spewed out from his mouth and due to the lapse of concentration his orb of chakra destabilized. Before the orb could implode, pain erupted from the top of Momoshiki's head. Naruto's fist struck directly on the crown of the man's head, sending him rocketing back into the hole that Naruto had sent him into during their first bout. Momoshiki's body impacted into the earth and before he could react, Naruto appeared direct above him with a lava-infused Rasengan spiraling in his left hand. Momoshiki's eyes widened and pain filled his body as the superheated Rasengan slammed into his abdomen. The lava-infused Rasengan grinded and seared his flesh before Naruto forced the jutsu to explode. A tremendous geyser of lava erupted into the heavens, followed shortly afterwards by a large shockwave. A scream of pain followed shortly after the large explosion of lava. Naruto stood over Momoshiki, who had several Gudodama stabbed through his appendages. Naruto was slightly surprised to see the man be unaffected by the Gudodama's ability to atomize whatever it touches. Interesting. Not like it mattered though. The man would be dead pretty soon. Naruto twirled one of his remaining Gudodama before placing it directly on Momoshiki's forehead. I really should just kill you now. But I promised Kaguya-chan I'd release her to finish you off. Anything you wanna say before you die? The short Ōtsutsuki grinned through bloody teeth before spitting a flob of substance at Naruto's face. Fuck you, mongrel. Naruto wiped the crimson liquid off of his face with a lazy swipe before slowly shaking his head. He raised his golden-clad sandal before stomping directly onto the man's lower jaw. Naruto sighed quietly before glancing to his right and spotting Sasuke, who was shouldering the fat Ōtsutsuki. Naruto didn't sense the man's life force and could only assume that he had killed him. That didn't take long. Naruto observed quietly with a raised brow. Sasuke didn't respond to the statement and proceeded to stare down at the diminutive Ōtsutsuki member. He isn't dead. Sasuke's placid statement caused a small smirk to form on Naruto's face. No, he isn't. Sasuke did not fall for the bait as he dropped the large Ōtsutsuki member on the ground. Why? He asked simply. Naruto's response was to hold up his right hand, signaling for Sasuke to finish the unfinished hand seal that he was making. There was a brief moment of silence that passes through the clearing before Sasuke turned his head towards Kaguya's prison. His mismatched orbs stared at the satellite of rock before he sighed quietly. It's been 15 years, Naruto. The blonde man ignored the statement and just continued to hold his right hand out. I don't know why I even bother. The ebony-haired man shook his head in annoyance before placing his left hand against Naruto's right hand, finishing the seal required for releasing Kaguya. The two men flared their chakra for a moment and shortly after the world began to shake. The giant satellite of rock began to slowly break apart, sending mountain-sized boulders down towards the earth. Several minutes passed by as both men stared at the construct of chakra that was slowly withering away. Naruto stood still with bated breath as he felt the presence of Kaguya wash over the elemental nations. Her chakra wrapped itself around him, cocooning and entangling him. His heartbeat began to quicken as the final pieces of rubble began to slowly fall away from Kaguya. His entire focus was centered on the beautiful woman who was floating motionlessly in the air. Several seconds went by in silence before the woman's eyes slowly opened. Her chakra flared for a brief moment before her head tilted downward. Her snowy white eyes focused on Momoshiki's form for all but a second before instantly shifting towards Naruto and staring directly into his unique eyes. The two powerful individuals continued their little stare-off for a full minute before Kaguya abruptly moved, and this time, Naruto was able to follow her without trouble. She appeared directly in front of him before slowly craning her head to stare into his eyes. He had gotten immensely taller these last few years. Where he once stood an inch or two above her, he now stood almost 2 heads taller than her, towering over her. His chakra. His chakra. It hadn't changed at all. Comforting. Warm. Kind. The goddess took a step closer to the man as her head tilted curiously. You have changed. A lot. Naruto stared into her beautiful white orbs for a moment before offering her a gentle smile. You have not. Still as beautiful as I remember. Kaguya blinked at the compliment, not truly knowing how to reply. She enjoyed it immensely despite not physically showing a reaction to it. The man was aware of her emotions anyway, so it didn't matter if she reacted to begin with. I heard you. She started softly. Every day that you visited. Asking me mundane questions or just talking to fill the silence. Your visits. I appreciated them. Naruto's cheeks pulled back as he grinned softly with a gentle look in his eyes. I thought about you. Every single day. I don't think there was a day that went by where I didn't. Kaguya's head inclined slightly at the statement. You expressed this sentiment many a times during your frequent visits. A small dash of red actually painted the whiskered man's cheeks that was thankfully hidden by his Kurama cloak. Naruto chuckled nervously while rubbing the back of his head. Why yeah. He coughed awkwardly as his eyes strayed towards Sasuke, who sported an amused smirk. Anyway, I have a gift. He slowly flourished with his left hand and came to stand by Kaguya's side. He placed his left hand on her lower back as he gestured towards the disabled Ōtsutsuki laying on the ground, pinned by Naruto's Gudodamas. I assume that this little cretin is Momoshiki, no? He asked rhetorically. Kaguya did not verbally respond as her gaze shifted to the tint Ōtsutsuki member currently splayed out on the ground. Her eyes narrowed significantly as she continued to stare the man who had hunted her since she was but a babe. She used to be terrified of this little vermin. Scared that he would devour her. Scared that he would kill her just like her beloved little sister. But now that she was getting a good look at him and sensing the power he held. He was weak, frail, pathetic. Kaguya slowly raised her hand with her index finger extended towards the tiny man. Her Byakugan activated as she glared at Momoshiki with hate. "I will see you in hell, cousin," she whispered venomously. A bone shard proceeded to fly out the tip of her finger before impaling the man directly in his forehead. His eyes widened exponentially before his body started to turn to ash. It only took 5 seconds for the man to be completely erased from existence. An impressive and slightly terrifying feat. Naruto stared at the remains of Momoshiki before glancing towards Sasuke and raising an eyebrow. "And you say you survived against that?" Sasuke just rolled his eyes before glancing towards the other deceased Ōtsutsuki that was laying on the ground. Black flames immediately covered the man's body as Sasuke turned towards Naruto. The two brothers shared a silent conversation before Sasuke disappeared in a burst of speed, leaving the two alone. Naruto was silent for a few moments before turning towards the pale-skinned goddess and blinking at the look that she was currently giving him. Her white orbs peered directly at him and he met her gaze with little trouble. His cerulean orbs traveled along her unique and delicate features for several moments before he took a step closer. Kaguya showed no objection to the movement and continued to remain silent, staring into his eyes. The blonde man took another step closer to the woman who still did not object to his advance. Naruto licked his lips for a moment before closing the distance between them in a single stride. Kaguya's head craned upwards as the blonde man stood but a single inch away from her. Her pale orbs roamed across his face, studying every inch that could see and memorizing every little detail. Chiseled chin, thin eyebrows, sharp eyes. An attractive man he was. Naruto started quietly, his usual confident and bold personality evading him. Damn, this is hard. He released a shaky sigh before shaking his head. He was about to start again before being stopped as Kaguya's finger found purchase atop his lips. The blonde man stared at the woman with furrowed eyebrows. "You need not say it. I am already aware, Naruto." Her tone was soft and gentle as her finger lightly trailed away from his mouth and onto his chiseled chin. Her dainty fingers gently grasped his chin and he slowly leaned into the touch. "I am not sure if I can say the same, but she faltered for a moment before ultimately sighing and placing her hand on the back of his head. She ran her fingers through his spiky hair as she stared into his eyes. "I am willing to try," she finished softly. Naruto's arms slowly encircled the woman who showed no signs of resisting. His larger stature towering over her and dwarfing her. His fingers idly swept through her long tresses of snowy white hair as he inhaled her scent. He inhaled heavily before exhaling quietly and staring into the woman's beautiful orbs. His eyes widened in surprise as the woman pulled his face towards his own. Their lips met a second later as Naruto stood completely still, not truly expecting the woman to do what she did. After a short awkward moment, his eyes slowly closed and his tense shoulders uncoiled slowly. His lips intertwined with the shorter woman's own and he succumbed to the touch of the goddess. Delicate, soft. Before he realized it, he was pulling the woman flush against his body. The goddess did not resist his action and seemed almost pleased to an extent. Her claw-like nails raked through his hair, sending chills down his spine. Kaguya released a tiny moan as she slipped her tongue into Naruto's mouth. Her body shook with pleasure as the taller man reciprocated her action. A heavy blush formed on the woman's face as she released another tiny mewl of pleasure. This was getting a bit overwhelming. Kaguya pulled away with a breathy exhale as her chest rose and fell heavily. Her cheeks were dusted red as she stared into the man's cerulean orbs. She enjoyed that very much. Naruto released a heavy exhale as he stared into the woman's eyes. He had wanted to do this for the last 15 years. He wasn't embarrassed to admit that he had even dreamt of this happening, but this was better than of those dreams. He might be addicted to the touch of a goddess. Chapter 2. What of this? Your kind call this delicacy, ice cream. Naruto's azure orbs focused on the pale-skinned goddess that sat in front of him. A small smile formed on his face as the woman poked the frozen treat with curious, yet suspicious eyes. Yes, Kaguya-chan. He slowly placed his own bowl of ice cream on the table before gesturing towards the woman. Here, let me. Kaguya slowly blinked as the blonde man picked her bowl up. She watched with narrowed eyes as the man scooped up some of the frozen treat before holding it out towards her. Silence. What is it that you are doing? Kaguya didn't understand why she was feeling so embarrassed. I am feeding you. He replied simply while jostling his hand slightly. Open your mouth, please. He requested with a tiny smile. The woman did not move for several long seconds as her blank gaze bore into Naruto's. I am not a child. Naruto slowly shook his head while still holding the spoon out towards her. Of course not. But I want to feed you. Will you let me? He questioned with a tilt of the head. Kaguya's eyes left her lover, before trailing around the establishment that she and Naruto were eating at, taking note of the many customers who were currently watching their little interaction. It was uncomfortable. Come on, Haim. Naruto spoke softly. Don't mind them. Focus on me. Look at me. Her pale eyes shifted from his face into the delicacy resting atop the spoon several times before she slowly and hesitantly opened her mouth. She watched the man's eyes crinkle from the soft smile that was now adorned on his handsome face. She felt heat slowly spread across her face as the spoon moved closer to her orifice. Naruto slowly placed the spoon inside Kaguya's mouth and grinned at her embarrassed expression. A few seconds went by before he slowly pulled the spoon out of her mouth. It was spotless. Kaguya's embarrassed expression tapered off as she stared at her bowl of ice cream. Give me more, she demanded. Naruto hid his chuckle with a minor cough before spooning more of the frozen treat onto the utensil and feeding it to Kaguya. Spoonful after spoonful was downed by the pale-skinned goddess who showed little sign of stopping. The quiet clinking of the spoon making contact with the glass bowl filled the silence between the two lovers. Naruto and Kaguya's eyes simultaneously traveled towards the empty bowl. There was a brief lull of silence before Kaguya grasped Naruto's hand while guiding it towards his own bowl. She proceeded to push down on his hand, signaling for him to scoop up his own ice cream and feed it to her. Which he did after a brief moment of laughter. Naruto continued to feed the mother of chakra with an easy smile on his face. He didn't mind it all that much. Ice cream wasn't really the sweet treat that he preferred, but he didn't mind it. But it seemed like it was Kaguya's favorite. She was practically making him shovel it down her throat. The woman cleaned his bowl in a fraction of the time she finished her own and proceeded to stare into his eyes with a small frown. Can I have more? Well, how could he say no to her? She was giving him the puppy dog eyes. And so, Naruto continued to feed the goddess ice cream. They went through every single flavor in the shop and Naruto took note that her favorite was chocolate pecan. He would have pegged her as a vanilla lover, to be honest. Kaguya possessed a pleased smile on her beautiful face as she rested against the mahogany chair she sat in. Several dozen empty bowls were stacked in front of her in a neat and orderly array. Kaguya silently eyed the waitress who was nervously collecting the empty bowls in front of her. She could sense the woman's fear and apprehension at being in such close proximity. It was disheartening. I hope you enjoyed the treats. The waitress bowed incredibly low, causing the glass bowls that sat on the metal tray to clank loudly against one another. Kaguya could practically taste the young woman's fear. It was basically palpable. Before the horned goddess could reply to the statement, the waitress swiftly retreated behind the sanctity of the kitchen to clean the used dishes. Kaguya stared at the woman's retreating form the entire time until losing sight of her behind the double doors that led into the kitchen. Her face was blank, but her eyes. Disappointment. Sadness. Regret. Hey. She felt the warm and gentle hand of her lover caress her own hands as he continued to speak. Just give it time, he reassured her softly. She didn't bother responding to his statement, choosing to stare at his hands that were gently stroking her own. She wanted to believe him, but Naruto had revealed exactly who she was a little over a month ago. A bold thing to do considering she was the entire reason that the Fourth Shinobi War even existed. It had been an incredibly arduous time. Not just for her but for Naruto as well. Many people in the elemental nations had genuinely questioned his sanity about the decision, and she did not truly blame them. Sasuke's intervention had put an immediate stop to that. As cold and off-putting as the man tended to be, he was Naruto's brother in all but blood. He had made sure to remind the elemental nation of every single deed that Naruto had committed and the actions he had selflessly done to pave the road for future peace. Only those who were truly close to Naruto had been accepting of his relationship with her. The others had wisely chose to keep their opinions to themselves. It would do the world no good if 2 out of the 3 strongest beings in the elemental nations were angered. Politics had been the major headache for her lover, and she had apologized on multiple occasions for it. The ethicality of her actions, her existence in the first place, their relationship, etc. Naruto weathered each and every one of the grueling conversations with an easy smile. Simply stating that she was worth the effort and headaches. It meant so much to her, but at the same time, she was entirely responsible for them. Are those horns on your head? Kaguya's attention was pulled from her thoughts as she slowly glanced to her left. She spotted a young girl, who couldn't be older than 6, staring at her with wide eyes. She possessed navy blue hair and sported a similar pair of white eyes, alluding to the fact that the little girl was of Hyuga descent. She had a pair of red markings that resembled a triangle on both of her cheeks and sported incredibly sharp canines. The little Inuzuka Hyuga wore a fluffy jacket that had wolf's fur lining the hood and an all-black skirt. The entire establishment went completely still and quiet at the little girl's outburst. Kaguya's blank eyes focused on the little girl as she stared into her eyes. Several long seconds passed before Kaguya responded. Yes, these are indeed horns. She answered simply. The little girl bounced excitedly as she moved closer to the table that Kaguya and Naruto sat at. Her hands grasped the table as she bounced up and down. Are they real? She questioned with an overly large smile. Kaguya once again replied in that same monotonous tone. Yes. The hyperactive girl seemed to get even more excited. Ooh, can I touch them? She rose a hand towards Kaguya's head despite being too short to even touch the woman's shoulders. Kaguya seemed taken aback by the question, and action is evident by her furrowed brows and tilted head. She blinked several times as the little girl desperately tried to grasp Kaguya's horns. Himawari-chan. The little girl stopped what she was doing before glancing towards the man that had called her name. Uncle Naru. She yelled happily while running towards him and jumping at him. The Nanadime Hokage caught the speeding rocket known as Himawari while laughing softly. Where are your parents? He asked her once she settled down in his lap. Himawari grinned from her position as she stared at Kaguya while replying. Mommy was too slow. I wanted ice cream but she was being a slowpoke. She sported an adorable pout after her words. Naruto patted the girl's head as he replied. I understand, but you can't run off like that. You'll scare your mother if you keep doing it. Do you like making her worried? The little girl's demeanor shifted immediately as she replied in a quiet tone. No. Naruto nodded his head while ruffling her hair. Then why do you run off, he asked in a slightly chastising tone. Himawari's head sank low and she adorned a tiny grimace on her face while replying quietly. I know. Naruto sighed in faux disappointment before replying. Looks like I'm going to have to tell your mother, Himawari. A sly smirk formed on his face as the girl turned around with a shocked expression despite the fact that her mother would already know about her running off. Little kids were so gullible. You can't. I'll get in trouble. And then mommy won't let me get ice cream anymore. Naruto glanced towards his lover for a moment before placing his index finger on his chin and humming exaggeratedly. I don't know. He tapped his chin several times before continuing. Maybe if you ask Kaguya-chan nicely, she can help you. Kaguya blinked slowly as the little girl turned towards her with a pointed gaze. She proceeded to clasp her hands together in a rather adorable gesture while bowing her head. Please help me, princess. I want to have ice cream. The horned goddess was silent for a scant moment before meeting her lover's gaze. Adorned upon his face was that same gentle smile he always had when talking to her. Kaguya averted her gaze with a light blush while responding to Himawari. It would be my pleasure. Himawari cheered loudly from her seated position before hopping out of Naruto's lap and racing towards Kaguya. Before she could reach the woman, a voice resounded out from the front of the store. Himawari-chan, what did I say about running? You scared me half to death. 3 pairs of eyes immediately turned towards the individual that had spoken. A rather buxom woman with the distinct traits of being of Hyuga descent began to slowly make her way towards them. Her navy blue hair fell to her lower back and the casual sweater she wore did little to hide her figure. The horned goddess glanced down towards her wardrobe for a mere moment as a minute frown appeared on her face. Was her kimono too boring? Perhaps a change would do her good. I'm so sorry. The brunette apologized with a minor amount of embarrassment. Himawari loves ice cream. Naruto donned a small smile while waving away her apology. It's fine, Hinata. She reminds me of myself at that age. He chuckled lowly while glancing towards Kaguya, who was subtly studying Hinata's outfit. Naruto didn't comment on his lover's interested gaze and just smiled. "How are you and Kiba doing?" he asked with a small gesture of his hand. The now-named Hinata gave a small smile as Himawari grasped her hand while swinging her arms back and forth. "We've been doing good." Her eyes trailed towards Kaguya for a moment before returning to Naruto's cerulean orbs. "Are Kaguya and yourself doing well?" "No problems, I'd hope." A concerned frown tugged at her features after her question. Kaguya noted that the woman seemed genuine about the question, which didn't really surprise her either. This woman had been incredibly head over heels for Naruto when they were younger. After his brief stint in the dating scene and his relatively short time with said woman, he had decided that it wasn't for him. They had been involved for a few months before ending the relationship and staying as friends. "Ah, you know." The usual backhanded compliment and snide remarks here and there. Naruto glanced towards his lover, who was now staring at the table with a narrowed gaze. "But other than that, perfect." Hinata glanced towards the quiet goddess with a small frown before speaking. "Are you well, Kaguya-sama?" The pale-skinned woman blinked slowly at being addressed before turning towards Hinata with a tilted head. Pale white orbs met a similar pair of eyes before Kaguya spoke in a subdued tone. "As well as I can be, considering all that has happened." Hinata's small frown remained as she spoke. "If you ever need someone to speak with, then I wouldn't mind lending an ear for you." The woman's gesture was appreciated but ultimately unneeded. "You need not to go out of your way for me." "Thank you, regardless," she responded quietly. Before Hinata could respond, a group of Anbu appeared around Naruto, who didn't seem perturbed by their sudden appearance. "Hokage-sama." The bird-masked member spoke aloud. "They are here," he informed. Naruto was silent for a moment before sighing quietly and slowly standing to his feet. They weren't supposed to arrive for another week, but... He shook his head, ending that trail of thought before glancing towards Kaguya and holding out his hand for the woman. "Duty calls, Haim." Kaguya silently took his hand while slowly standing to her feet and moving closer to the blonde man. The hand she held slowly vacated its position before finding purchase on her lower back. "Do you want me to walk you home?" he questioned quietly, not caring about the individuals who were certainly staring at them. Kaguya's eyes slowly closed as she succumbed to the gentle touch of her lover. She rested her head against his toned chest, taking care to position her horns away from his neck. "I will be fine, my love," she responded quietly with a hint of embarrassment, not used to such public displays of affection. Not that she minded or anything. Naruto said nothing as he ran his hand through her long tresses of snowy hair. He placed a gentle kiss atop her crown, knowing how she felt about public displays of affection. He squeezed her tightly and made to pull away, though he was surprised when the woman pulled him back. When he tilted his head to stare down at her, she presented a chaste kiss upon his lips. It was quick and slightly awkward, but Naruto didn't truly care about the specifics. He was just surprised the woman had been the one to initiate it. His cerulean orbs stared down into Kaguya's pale orbs as a small smile formed on his face. After a moment though, the woman averted her gaze with a red face. "I will be home as soon as possible, Haim." Kaguya swallowed her anxiety and responded quietly. "And I will be waiting for you." Naruto gave one last gentle smile before he and the group of Anbu near them disappeared in a yellow flash. The horned goddess stood still for several moments while her arms slowly fell limp to her side. She felt naked, like the world was sitting atop her shoulders and threatening to crush her. Her pale orbs slowly fell to the vibrant tile of the establishment as her chest tightened. Anxiety threatened to tear her core apart as she stood like a statue. Hoping, praying that she wasn't the center of attention now that Naruto disappeared. But, she refused to look. Refused to raise her gaze and see the looks of resentment, fear, hatred. Kaguya's clawed fingers flexed anxiously as she squeezed her eyes tightly. She tried with all her might to push out the pervasive thoughts that threatened to drown her but she couldn't. And like the coward she was, she fled. A distorted portal appeared directly below her as she fell through it, disappearing and running away from the judgmental looks. "You've been here for several hours." Kaguya's eyes slowly opened, yet she remained motionless. Her snowy orbs centered on the gravestone directly in front of her as her expression remained blank. "And you've been observing me for just as long," she replied back. Sasuke stood several feet behind the woman as he stared at her kneeled form. He was quiet for a moment before responding quietly. A safe haven. He searched quietly. Kaguya was quiet for several moments as she studied the gravestone of Tsunade Senju before responding lowly. Did he ask you to watch over me? The Uchiha responded quietly as he strode closer. Call it a favor. You do not strike me as a man who does things out of their graciousness of their heart. Despite how condescending the statement sounded, Kaguya meant no disrespect. Sasuke understood what the goddess meant and came to stop directly beside her. You'd be correct. He responded back simply. And the reason you are here? She questioned just as easily. Sasuke was silent for several minutes as he too stared at the grave that Naruto had personally made for Tsunade. You are too harsh on yourself. He finally stated. Whatever Kaguya had expected the Uchiha to say, it was most certainly not that. She blinked silently before finally tearing her gaze away from the grave. Her pale orbs stared into Sasuke's mismatched eyes for a moment before she responded. I, solely, am responsible for the suffering that plagued this world. My selfish desires snuffed out the lives of the innocent, the pure, and the wicked. Her gaze hardened as she glared into Sasuke's Rinnegan. Whatever advice you have for me, keep to yourself. I will forever live with this burden and knowledge. I do not deserve this second chance. I do not deserve happiness. Her tone rose an octave higher as her chakra began to leak out angrily. I deserve nothing. The immediate surroundings, sans for Sasuke and Tsunade's grave, was instantly reduced to dust and ash. Her wave of anger had quite literally tore the earth asunder. Sasuke weathered the woman's outburst with a straight face, not intimidated or worried in the slightest. And yet, Naruto believes otherwise. He stated simply. Before Kaguya could respond, a warm and calming aura settled in the area followed by a bright, golden flash. Naruto appeared beside his lover bathed in the chakra cloak of his Biju. His unique eyes glanced towards Sasuke for a mere moment before he turned his attention back to his lover. Crouching beside Kaguya, he spoke softly while outstretching his hand. Come, Heim. It was a simple gesture followed by an even simpler suggestion. But those simple gestures, they meant everything to Kaguya. She wordlessly grasped the man's hand as her anger willed to nothing. Her thoughts cleared and it felt as if she was floating on clouds. A sense of weightlessness encroached around her and she allowed the feeling to wash over her. When Kaguya opened her eyes, she was no longer kneeling in front of Tsunade's grave. Instead she was in Naruto's mindscape, coming face to face with his Biju. The ginormous fox was laying down with its head resting atop its human-like hands. Its breathing was slow, alluding to the fact that the beast was napping. The goddess turned her attention away from the fox to stare at her lover with an expectant gaze. She did not need to voice her question, he likely already knew. Privacy, he said knowingly. The blond man proceeded to sit on the surface of the water in his mindscape. His eyes found hers and he patted the water directly in front of him. Sit, Heim. The pale-skinned goddess stared at the man for a second before acquiescing. Her hands folded neatly in her lap as her attention centered on Naruto's voice. An action that caused a small smile to appear on Naruto's face. She was so beautiful. Talk to me, Kaguya-chan. He started softly. What is wrong? A small frown marred the woman's face as she stared into the cerulean orbs of her lover. What was wrong? Naruto knew what was wrong. I can't help you if you don't talk to me, Heim. Frustration swelled in her bosom as her gaze fell to the watery floor of the man's shared mindscape. Her claw-like nails raked against her ceremonial kimono as she struggled to voice her problems. After several minutes in silence, Kaguya finally spoke. Why? Her voice was small and unsure as she continued. Why have you gone so far for me? Why do you continue to do so? Tears of frustration began to drip down her beautiful face as she continued. I don't deserve any of this. I've accepted that I'll never be accepted in this world. Kaguya clenched her eyes tightly and bowed her head low. My hands are stained. I'm a monster. This regret, this pain. Kaguya's claws raked through her clothing, drawing blood upon her thighs as she spoke once more. I never wanted this. I can't do this anymore. There was complete silence following her emotional outburst, but she cared not for it. Tears fell down her face like a faucet and she dare not try to stop them. If I could take it back I would. I'd have never eaten that accursed fruit. Sadness began to resurface from deep within her as she struggled to control her emotions. My race only knows destruction. I was a fool to ever think I could be a human. To think that I could be different. You are not a monster, Kaguya. Kaguya's snowy white orb snapped towards Naruto the instant those words left his mouth. She wanted to refute those words. To scream at him about how wrong he was. But she couldn't, because deep down, she wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe she was different. Wanted to believe she was more like a human. Naruto's hand slowly lifted from his lap and found purchase on Kaguya's cheek. His thumb gingerly stroked her cheek before slowly wiping away her tears. I can sense the regret that you hold every day. I know that it eats at you every night and keeps you awake. Naruto's eyes softened as he placed his other hand on top of Kaguya's clasped hands. But you aren't a monster. Would a monster truly feel regret for their actions? The goddess averted her gaze after that question and stared at the ground in sadness. Of course they wouldn't, but she had still done the actions and nothing would change that. Hey, he began softly while slowly raising the woman's gaze back to him. Time heals all wounds, Kaguya. There are plenty of things that you can do for self-atonement. But just know that you're not alone. I'll always be here and I'll stand beside you to help you find your inner peace. Even if it kills me. Tears coalesced in Kaguya's eyes once again as she stared into Naruto's eyes. The amount of love and adoration he was showing. The pale-skinned woman practically launched herself at the man, knocking him to the ground as she straddled his abdomen. I do not deserve you, was all she said as her lips descended upon his. Naruto glanced at his company and took note of their widened eyes and frightful expressions. It was completely understandable, he thought. Kaguya was not an individual that the average person or even shinobi for that matter, could stand next to. Her mere presence caused those around her to become uncomfortable, mainly in part due to her lack of control over her power. She wasn't aware of how little control she actually possessed over it. Which was a conundrum in itself. It wasn't as if she couldn't control the finer aspects of her abilities, because she certainly could. But she struggled to rein in her power, and that was something that frightened people. It would be like he or Sasuke walking around while carelessly bearing their chakra down upon the earth. He would need to speak with her about it. But he still wanted to have fun with the situation at hand, and so, he would. Naruto raised an amused eyebrow at the group in front of him before speaking. Is everything okay? The group of individuals were silent for a moment before one of the men, a rather important business prospector who wanted to expand his railroad business, spoke nervously. Why you didn't feel that power? The hero of the Fourth Shinobi War raised an eyebrow once more while adopting a confused expression. What do you mean? I felt nothing. The man seemed taken aback by the Nonodime Hokage's reaction and spluttered for a moment. That power. It shook the village. His eyes left the blonde cages as he turned towards his associates. I'm not going crazy, am I? His associates nodded their heads with varying degrees of fear and uncertainty. Naruto was just amused at the entire ordeal. Well, whatever it was, I'm sure it's being handled. He replied rather flippantly while waving his hand lazily. Come now, we have much to discuss about your business. The last train I rode in, I had to save the country it resided in. Let's hope I don't have to do that again. Thank you for your time, Hokage-sama. The businessman bowed low, his workers and associates following suit. We at Zeta Corp appreciate all that you've done. Naruto slowly stood to his feet, towering over the group and offering them a small smile. It was my pleasure, and I hope that your business thrives and we see the usage of this transportation grow in the coming years. The blonde cage shook the man's hand while seeing the group out. Once the group vacated the office, his smile disappeared as he spoke quietly. Follow them, he ordered quietly to seemingly no one. I don't trust their intentions for 1 second. Take a squad with you and watch over them for the next several months. Bi-weekly updates and you have full authorization to exterminate them if evidence comes to the surface. After he finished speaking, a shinobi seemed to materialize out of thin air just in front of the blonde man. The shinobi was rather short and possessed ebony, spiky hair. Their mask was completely blank, unlike the usual animal-themed Anbu masks. Permission for off-grid recruitment, Hokage-sama. The unknown shinobi requested respectfully. Naruto turned his back against the shinobi and stared out into the village. Choose who you wish. Squad of 4 only. No more. Hi, Hokage-sama. The The shinobi seemed to just dematerialize after his statement. The blonde Kage continued to gaze out into the village for several minutes. He knew that Sasuke was in the room and Sasuke knew that he knew. They are bold. Sasuke finally spoke aloud. He slowly strode towards Naruto's position before standing beside the man and staring out into the village. Naruto glanced at the Uchiha for a moment before crossing his arms against his chest. To have the gall and audacity to come directly to me. It seems the outside world has stopped fearing us. The Rinnegan wielder was quiet for a few moments before shaking his head. The time of shinobi is coming to an end, Naruto. Sasuke narrowed his eyes for a moment before speaking. Stagnation will be the death of our kin. Naruto frowned for a moment before furrowing his eyebrows. I am well aware. If you are aware, then you know what will happen when those rogue Ōtsutsuki decide to finally visit. Sasuke's Rinnegan glowed for a moment as he stared directly at Naruto. The world cannot aid, we will be alone. Naruto turned his head towards his brother, meeting the man's gaze head-on. We do not need aid. They will be crushed. The two strongest men in the elemental nations stared into each other's eyes before it was broken by Sasuke. We should be the one searching for them. He proposed quietly. Naruto sighed quietly as his gaze returned to the village. We have no idea where to even begin. How do you propose we accomplish that? Kaguya lacks the information that we need. Sasuke said nothing in response and continued to stare out into the village. What happened? Naruto questioned quietly. The Uchiha was silent for a moment before speaking. An emotional outburst. Naruto nodded silently before sighing. Her regret continues to grow. Sasuke glanced at Naruto out the corner of his eyes before responding. Do your job. Naruto's eyebrow twitched in annoyance at the statement. Don't you have a daughter to raise? He asked in annoyance. A small smirk formed on Sasuke's face before the man disappeared in a burst of speed, leaving Naruto alone. I hate Uchihas. Naruto grumbled quietly to himself and his personal Anbu squad watching over him. Kaguya released a quiet sigh of pleasure as she sank into her tub of scalding hot water. A small cloud of fog filled the entire room due to the extreme heat of the water. The woman's long tresses splayed out beneath her as she rested her head on the rim of the porcelain tub. Her eyes slowly closed and another sigh of pleasure released from her throat. Relaxing, comforting. The horned goddess gingerly ran her fingers along the walls of her extravagant tub. A gift from her lover. One he was all too happy to build for her. She appreciated it immensely even if it was far too big, in her opinion at least. This tub could fit at least 5 individuals with little to no problem. Naruto always went out of his way for her. Always showering her with gifts, trinkets, and affection. He was, well, there wasn't a word that could accurately describe what Naruto was. Understanding, loving, empathetic, compassionate. He was, himself. And she absolutely loved that aspect. Kaguya felt a pair of rough and callous hands rest atop her shoulders. A sigh of appreciation left her as the individual's hands worked her muscles. Forgive me, my love. My guests took their sweet time in explaining all the benefits that Konoha would get from this transaction. An amused hum left Naruto's throat as he dug his thumbs into the woman's shoulders. They layered their words with honey, but deep down I could sense the poison that rested between the cracks. Kaguya's hands gripped the side of the tub as she released a tiny moan of appreciation. I trust that everything will work out, yes. By the gods, his hands were like heaven. Naruto chuckled lightly before replying. I have Sanji watching over them. If anything happens, then he will handle it. It took a great deal of effort for the goddess to reply without moaning, but she was eventually successful in her endeavor. How are you so good at this? She asked in a slightly breathy tone. Once again, the blonde man released a hearty chuckle at the woman's question. Lots of practice. Eros Sennin took me to a lot of brothels during our training trip. A soft smile appeared on his face as he reminisced on the old memories of his time with Jiraiya. He said it was for business, and I thought he was full of shit. Turns out that brothels really do carry a lot of information. Kaguya's eyes slowly opened as she listened to her lover speak on his past. She sat quietly as he continued speaking, enjoying the sound of his voice and ministrations. It was kind of embarrassing at the time, but I got hit on a lot by the women working in those establishments. I was always pretty nervous around women, not knowing what to say or do. Afraid I'd say something stupid or dumb. Naruto released a tiny chuckle that had the corners of Kaguya's lips tugging upwards. And since I definitely wasn't going to partake in their services, I figured I could at least help them in other ways. Took some time, but I got pretty good at giving massages. A sour expression formed on his face though as he continued. But they always managed to mess with me. Always teasing me about where my hands could go and other nonsense related to sexual acts. It was all too much for someone like me at that age. Naruto smiled softly as his hands ran along Kaguya's skin. Boot. He dragged on softly before crouching low and whispering into one of Kaguya's ears, his lips lightly kissing her neck. It's one of the many skills I possess. Kaguya's hands proceeded to crack the porcelain rim of the tub at her lover's suggestive tone. A healthy blush exploded on her face as the man pulled away while laughing. Why, you are too much. One of Naruto's hands glided along her wet skin before caressing her neck lovingly. He leaned over his lover before staring directly into her pale eyes. I could be a lot more if you want me to. At Kaguya's slightly embarrassed expression, a cheeky smile tugged at his features. Taking advantage of her embarrassed actions, he leaned in and planted a gentle kiss on her lips, in which the woman returned. Naruto began to pull away but was stopped as the woman's hands grasped onto his shirt. His cerulean orbs stared into hers with slight confusion before his eyes widened as he was quite literally lifted off his feet. The Nanadime Hokage was airborne for less than a second before being engulfed in the scorching water of Kaguya's tub. A second passed by before Naruto surfaced, spluttering slightly at the unexpected action his lover had committed. He proceeded to wipe the steaming hot water out of his face while staring directly into Kaguya's amused eyes. Mind your step, my love. The floor is slippery. Naruto blinked a single time at the woman's amused statement before narrowing his eyes. You do realize that you're naked and wet, correct? I hold all the power here. Her response. Then use that power. Naruto blinked at the woman's response, not truly expecting it. After getting over his brief surprise, Naruto wrapped his arms around the woman before standing up to his full height. Water cascaded down both of their forms as Naruto and Kaguya stared into each other's eyes. Kaguya's legs proceeded to wrap around the waist of her lover as her arms crossed behind his neck. Her face was the same shade as a tomato as the warm water continued to idly drip off of her nude body. It had been so long since she had last shown someone so much of her body. She was on complete display for Naruto, and that single thought caused a blazing inferno to build from deep within her breast. Naruto was seeing her. All of her. Embarrassment. Anxiety. Apprehension. She wasn't used to this. Before those particular feelings could wash over her, Naruto's lips made contact with her own. His calloused hands moved down her back before gripping her waist tightly. Kaguya released a tiny mewl of pleasure at his touch and proceeded to close her eyes. Her claw-like fingernails dug into the man's back as her legs locked tightly around his waist. You're so beautiful, Kaguya. The woman opened her eyes, coming face to face with Naruto's loving expression. All the anxiety, all the apprehension, the fear, the uncertainty, all of those feelings just washed away as she stared into his loving gaze. The man that knew her inside and out. The man that knew every little thing about her. The man that she loved. I am yours, Naruto. Lemon scene. Kaguya returned the man's kiss with a heated one of her own, clawing at his clothed back as their tongues intertwined. The pale-skinned goddess released a breathy moan as Naruto's hands gripped the flesh of her rear. His fingers roughly dug into her pale skin and she had to refrain from bucking her hips. His touch. His scent. She was being driven crazy. Kaguya felt her back make contact with something silky as she idly realized that Naruto had carried her back to their shared bedroom. A massive blush began to form on her face as she finally realized what was going to happen. Her pale orbs gazed up at her lover, who was now straddling her. His eyes, still full of love and affection, now carried a hungry gaze of lust. Lust for her, and only her. Kaguya watched with widened eyes as Naruto relinquished himself of his jacket and shirt. His toned chest and arms on full display as she greedily memorized everything she could. She felt his fingers gently glide on her abdomen and a breathy exhale left her. He proceeded to trace along her stomach before slowly going further south. Kaguya bit her lower lip and shut her eyes as Naruto's finger began to trail down her small patch of pubic hair. She felt a great degree of embarrassment swell within her as his finger began to dance through her small patch of white hair. The woman's embarrassment was immediately erased as she felt the warm digit of her lover prod at her sex. A tiny moan escaped her as his finger rubbed her nether lips in a slow and teasing manner. Kaguya's hands clawed at her silky sheets as she released several heavy exhales. She clenched her jaw tightly and her head dug into the soft fabric of her bed as Naruto's fingers slowly entered her wet folds. The pleasure. The ecstasy. Kaguya writhed several times as Naruto slowly pumped his finger inside of her. Her hips rose off the bed several times before Naruto's hand pushed her back down. The man proceeded to lean down atop her, making sure to continue his ministrations, and began to softly nip at her exposed neck. Kaguya released several light moans as Naruto bit and licked her neck. Her hands left the silky sheets before finding purchase atop his back. Her fingernails clawed at his back but he showed little care for it. "Naruto!" she exclaimed loudly with a breathy exhale. Before she could continue, she felt her walls spread further as Naruto's middle finger joined his index finger in exploring her drenched walls. Oh by the gods! This was so good. Naruto smirked quietly as he pumped his fingers into the pale-skinned goddess. He began to lightly trail his tongue along her neck before reaching her ear and whispering softly into her ear. "I love you, Kaguya." At his words, she released a rather high-pitched moan followed by her walls clenching tightly around his fingers. Kaguya's hips shot upwards as she experienced her first climax of the night. Despite the fact her eyes were closed, she was sure that they crossed. Her toes curled harshly and her claw-like nails dug deep into Naruto's back. Her lower body shook several times before abruptly dropping back onto the silky sheets of the bed. Sweat glistened off her pale skin as she exhales heavily. She felt Naruto's weight vacate her body briefly but thought little of it. Kaguya's breathing finally managed to level out and she slowly opened her tired eyes. Her pale eyes widened as she stared at Naruto who was now nude. Her lower body trembled slightly as she stared at his. "Oh Kami." Naruto was atop her in an instant and she was loath to stop him. She felt the man's enlarged member make contact with her nether lips and released a tiny moan at the thought of it piercing her. Naruto rubbed the tip of his appendage against Kaguya's walls, using the woman's comb as lubrication. Her moans of appreciation spurred him on and he throbbed greatly as she exhales harshly. "Kaguya," he spoke in a raspy tone as his enlarged member prodded at her soaking entrance. The woman's eyes opened as she began to instinctively spread her legs. The pale-skinned goddess stared directly into her lover's eyes before speaking quietly. "Make me yours, Naruto." After her statement, Kaguya released an incredibly loud moan as Naruto entered her. Her fingernails bit into his back harshly as she was stretched. Her head impacted against the mattress as her eyes clenched tightly. He was so big. Kaguya. Naruto grunted loudly as the woman's walls tightened around him like a vice. His eyes were entranced as he watched his slowly disappear inside the woman. He began to push further and further ever so slowly, allowing Kaguya to adjust to his size. Naruto hissed in pleasure as the woman continued to tighten around him. His thick member throbbed harshly as Kaguya gyrated her hips. Take me." The blonde man didn't need to be told twice. He pulled back until only the head of his appendage was left inside before instantly sheathing himself once more. The action caused Kaguya to moan in appreciation as she allowed the man to dictate the pace. His soon began to piston in and out at a rather harsh pace, but she cared little. He felt so good. Kaguya's bounced rhythmically as her lover pounded her walls. She released several guttural moans as the man's throbbing head continued to stretch her out further and further. Naruto grunted quietly as his rhythm began to slow. His hardened member throbbed harshly and he grit his teeth tightly trying to prevent his oncoming orgasm. Kaguya moaned lowly at his slower pace before opening one of her eyes, taking in Naruto's sweaty form as he penetrated her. The sight of her lover was enough for her walls to clench tightly as another wave of ecstasy crashed into her. Her hands left Naruto as she began to rip through the silky fabric of her bed. "Naruto!" she exclaimed loudly as her body tensed up harshly. A rather harsh orgasm slammed into her as her vision exploded, experiencing small bursts of stars. The sight of his lover experiencing her second orgasm was too much for Naruto. Coupled with the fact that the woman's walls were squeezing him with reckless abandon on top of already being close. "Kaguya!" Naruto grunted loudly before sheathing himself fully inside. His hardened member throbbed a single time before he eventually came, painting the woman's walls. Kaguya's legs clenched around her lover, preventing him from pulling out even if he had wanted to. The warm excess began to slowly seep out of Kaguya's walls as she moaned lowly. Naruto exhaled harshly as he fell atop his lover. Both lovers laid motionless for several seconds as they came down from their respective orgasms. It was Naruto who spoke first. I love you, Kaguya. I'll love you too. N Naruto. Lemon scene end. She has hidden herself well. A figure clad in all white spoke aloud. The man possessed a unique horn that wrapped around his head. But she couldn't hide forever. The man placed his hand on a mirror-like object that was currently showing a picture of Kaguya's location. The woman was seen laying in the arms of a blonde man with both of them sleeping. Mingling with humans again. For shame Kaguya Heim. A different voice resounded out loud. This individual possessed a slightly jovial tone and he too possessed horns atop his head, though he had brown horns that grew from the back of his head and wrapped around to his forehead, with a small gap in between them. Come Arashiki. Let us prepare. The first horned Ōtsutsuki ordered. The now named Arashiki glanced at his compatriot for a moment before smirking. Prepare? He questioned mockingly. We can crush them easily, Ashiki. Let's just end this now. Ashiki adopted a fierce expression as he glared directly at Arashiki, bearing the full might of his chakra upon his relative. And end up like Momoshiki and Kinshiki. I will not take this lightly. His pupils began to glow an amber orange with black sclera surrounding them as he continued harshly. Do as I say. With that parting statement, the powerful Ōtsutsuki member left the room, not caring for Arashiki's response. Arashiki glared at his relative with hate before scoffing loudly and returning his attention back to Kaguya and her monkey partner. He stared at them for several minutes before scoffing loudly and producing a red chakra hook. How tough can this little shit be?